Hello there, my friends, and welcome to another episode of Can You Talk Real Quick, where I talk to one very smart person for about 10 to 20 minutes about one specific issue in the news, something really relevant that I want to learn about that I think we all should know a bit more about. And today, my guest is Bill B. in D.C., who I've been talking to for over a year about the war in Ukraine, the Russian invasion. On June 6th, the Kakhovka Dam in Ukraine was breached, causing extensive flooding located on the Dnieper River in Kherson. The dam was under control of the Russian military, which had seized it in the early days of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. But that dam breach, was it done on purpose? Was it an explosion, a detonation, or something else? And if so, who did it? That's why I called Bill B., who is, for some reason, a real expert on foreign policy, geopolitics, politics, and so much more, and pays very close attention, has all kinds of really important sources who have started to come to him for information because of how much he takes in. Ostensibly, he's a business owner. He owns parking garages in D.C. If you're ever in D.C., look him up. He'll show you around. But for some reason, he knows all this stuff. We all think he works for the CIA, but he promises he doesn't. Follow him on Twitter at Bill B in DC, and we love him most because he's not trying to make a buck. He's not a pundit. He doesn't have a Substack, a Patreon, just a Twitter account and a friendship with me. And if you like this conversation, go listen to him on Maddie C's podcast, What Am I Making?, where they had a really extensive conversation about travel and Bill's life and everything he's seen. It's very, very good. Check that out. But right now, it's Bill Boyle on the Kakhovka Dam breach and who done it. Billy Boyle, back joining us here on Stand Up. Everybody loves when he does. I'm glad you could. Thank you. How are you? Good to see you.
I'm doing well, thank you. Good to see you as well.
I have to talk to you about what's going on. Obviously, you reached out to me because you said this was a very, very big deal. You said the dam blowing up is quite a thing. The headlines: what could the Ukraine dam disaster mean for Russia's war? NBC News. Reuters: Ukrainians face homelessness, disease as floodwaters crest from dam disaster. That's New York Times. Flood rescue efforts continue in Ukraine after dam disaster. CNN: everything is drowning. But the thing that I think is most important, well, those are most important because human beings are in harm's way. But the thing to me, the headline to me that's most important is both sides are blaming the other side. And what I was thinking of asking you is, in the history of war, I'm surprised this isn't always the case for what it means for propaganda wins. But of course, why would the Ukrainians blow up their own dam and kill their own people? The answer to that is to make it look like Russia did it. And we understand what that would breed in terms of discontent, in terms of anger, in terms of recruiting. I mean, talk to me about the history of this and why and who did it and why.
Okay, so it's really, really clear that the Russians did it. And I will hit 3-4 things that just close the case completely.
Okay.
Number one, the Russians control the bridge. They controlled the bridge. There were Russian troops on the bridge still. They were being fired upon very occasionally by the Ukrainian side, but they were on that bridge. They controlled it. They controlled the locks, everything else. When the Ukrainians tried to blow the bridge, the dam north of Kyiv, to stop Russian troops from getting to Kyiv during the beginning of the invasion, they put 2,000 kilograms of explosives on a much smaller dam and managed to blow up one small lock with 2,000 kilograms of explosives. This dam is 10 times bigger, stronger. It's a 5-story building. It's a whole different animal than the other bridge that the Ukrainians controlled and were barely able to just sort of crack. This thing has a 200-meter hole in it. The Russians were being described by the Ukrainians 6 months ago. The Ukrainians are saying, look, they're putting all kinds of explosives on the bridge. The Russians were the only ones who had access to it. The Russians were the only ones who had the ability to put that much of a bang on the spot to make it break. So the idea that the Ukrainians did it is just not feasible. It's just not possible because they don't have access. They didn't have access. And even if they did and tried to put explosives on it, the Russians would have seen them putting 20,000 kilograms of explosives on that dam. And that's just not feasible, possible, or realistic in any way.
How come no one saw the Russians doing it then? Or whoever did it? How come no one?
Right. because the Russians placed the explosives while they were being pressured on the other bank of of Kherson. In other words, on the west bank of the Dnieper River. So the Russians were fully in control of both banks of the river when they put the explosives on this. That's why. This is before they lost the west.
There's no ability to surveil that from the sky?
I mean, it depends on whether people were really looking for it at the time. Right. There's an enormous amount of ISR all over this area, but did somebody really, while there's huge battles going on all over the Kherson battlefield, was somebody saying, hey, let's spend a lot of time to watch that bridge? Or were they saying, where are Russian troops that the Ukrainians have to dislodge? I doubt anyone spent a lot of time on that.
Save me the time of having to do the research. I trust you'll tell me is there a lot of confusion with analysts on who did it? Do I have to look that up to prove you right or wrong?
No. All that's happening right now is that people are keeping their powder a little bit dry so that just in case the 1% chance turns out it was just a failure of the dam instead of an explosion, that they can say, all right, well, we didn't say specifically the Russians did it. But even if there was a failure, Pete, this dam was at like 10, 15 meters, as low as it's ever been about 4 months ago. The Russians then closed all the gates and had it all the way up to 30 meters. They had it as high as it could possibly go, which is in and of itself dangerous to the dam, but not catastrophic in any way. But the reality is that say it broke because they let the thing fill up so much, that's still on the Russians who were controlling the sluices of this dam. So if it was a catastrophic mistake, which I don't believe, even in that 1% chance, it's still on the Russians because they did it. They filled it up completely on purpose. And by the way, if you're looking at the prospect of a cross-river attack from Ukraine, and your idea is to break the dam to make that difficult, would you want the reservoir really low or would you want the reservoir really full? Obviously, you would want it really full because that gives you the biggest bang for your buck when you finally blow the damn thing up.
Okay, let's say that you're right, that Russia did it. That leads us to why. And your analysis is that Russia doesn't do it if they have any prospect of winning. That's what you texted me.
Yeah, I mean, when you blow this dam, a couple of different things. The Crimean Canal, which is attached to the reservoir farther north, it depends for its flow on the dam being reasonably full. This is 85% of the water that goes to Crimea comes from the Crimean Canal. It doesn't just, by the way, give people water. It irrigates all of the agriculture that happens in Crimea, the vast majority of it. Now, the Russians have been putting water in reservoirs everywhere they possibly can in Crimea. They bought themselves 18 months to 2 years, probably just to give people water to drink. But they basically destroyed Crimea's agricultural possibilities. They have very definitely destroyed the agricultural possibilities of everything on their bank of the Dnieper River to the east of the dam, because there's a bunch of canals. There's 4 major canals, and none of them are going to have any water in them. And so that means that there isn't going to be any, or most of the drinking water is going to get affected, but there's not going to be nearly enough water to plant any fields, to get any grain, sunflowers, whatever. They have just destroyed that region until these dams are reconstituted as an agricultural powerhouse. The whole point of owning these places is to get something out of it. If you control it, but you have no water, so it doesn't produce any wheat or sunflower oil or anything else, you've just wasted all this effort, because those things give you not just economic power, they give you geopolitical levers you can use to help win the war. If you think you're going to lose it, then you figure, what the hell, salt the ground anyway, right? If I'm going to lose all of the rest of Kherson, Zaporizhzhia, all the way to Mariupol, well, why not just completely screw the Ukrainians so that it's their mess when they finally take it over? And that is my feeling on why they did this. That's the number one reason they did it. I think the number 2 reason that they did it is that they are terrified of the Ukrainians coming over the river. So by releasing this inundation, they destroy the landing zones and they flood the landing zones on their side of the river. They don't really care about their own men. They let their own men get washed away. But they didn't have enough men in the first place to defend that river line. So turn it all into a swamp for a month or two to buy yourself some time. That is, I think, the tactical reason they did it. The strategic reason, though, is why not do the tactical reason? Because strategically we're at a loss here.
The Russian defense minister, Sergei Shoigu, is that how you say his name?
Shoigu, correct.
He charged that Ukraine destroyed the dam to prevent Russian attacks in the Kherson region after what he alleged was a failed Ukrainian counteroffensive. He claimed Ukraine had lost 3,715 troops and 52 tanks since Sunday, and in a rare acknowledgement of Russia's own losses, said 71 Russian troops were killed and 210 wounded. Ukraine followed its standard practice of not commenting on its casualties. No reason to trust the Russian.
Yeah, but that's just gobbledygook in the first place, right? The Russians
just to the point that he says Ukraine destroyed the dam to prevent Russian attacks in the Kherson region.
Right. So there have been none. The Russians have been launching some artillery over the river, which won't be affected by this flooding anyway. So that's a completely ridiculous. I mean, by the way, he's taking attacks that happened 200 kilometers to the east and pretending they have something to do with attacks over the Dnieper River. That's completely absurd. It's not real. He's just kind of throwing a ton of things at the board and hoping that some of the propaganda sticks. Russia was never going to attack across that river again. At best, it was going to defend it. And its great fear was that Perekop, which is the entry to the Crimean Peninsula, is only, 60 kilometers from the southern end of that river. Maybe the Ukrainians couldn't put 20 armor divisions across that river, but a big raiding party at the wrong time as Russians are trying to retreat would be absolutely devastating for them. That's what this is about. This is pure defense on the Russian side. It's giving up on any real chance, I think, of winning the war. And by the way, if you're China and India and the rest of the poorer parts of the world that depend on cheap wheat prices, how do you think you feel about this? You ain't happy.
Well, I mean, I'm stuck still on the possibility that it could have been that this dam was in disrepair, and the high levels that you mentioned acknowledged caused it to break. Obviously, Zelensky says it was blown up at 2:50 in the morning, but you said 1% chance that it was just that it broke on its own.
Yes, I mean it had not been seriously damaged by anybody. Those HIMARS strikes were on the bridge next to it. It got hit once or twice, but these are enormous concrete structures that are actually well designed for dealing with earthquakes, everything else. When I said that it took, 1,000 pounds, 1,000 kilograms done twice on just one single small lock in the reservoir north of Kyiv, one HIMARS missile is like 500 kilograms. That you hit one place with that, you don't even hit it on the lock. You hit it on the thickest, strongest part of the dam. It's not going to do anything. I mean,
you're not saying it was hit by a missile.
Well, no, that's one Russian thing. Yeah, I'm saying it was hit by a missile at some point during the war, but it was hit on the top of the strongest part. And by the way, if a dam is going to break, have you ever heard of a dam? Suddenly, boom, there's a crack, and then it's 200 meters wide is the hole. That's absurd. You would have seen cracking, other things beginning before that happened.
No dam breaking expert. You're like, have you ever heard of a dam breaking? And I'm like, I don't know. I don't know is the answer to that. I don't know anything about dams.
So the Russians have formed for this because there was a dam near Zaporizhzhia during World War II that Joseph Stalin had blown up, which killed a bunch of his own troops and which killed a bunch of his own citizens, which he did in order to slow down a German advance. Same thing, same sorts of effects, same explosive demolition of a dam with the same. And by the way, the flood of the water, there are models out there that you can find. The timing of the flooding downriver was exactly what would have happened with an explosive release rather than there's a crack, it gets a little worse, and then it breaks open. I mean, it happened like that.
The AP News, in its article about this, one of its articles says, experts have previously said the dam was in disrepair, which could have also led to the breach. David Helms, a retired American scientist who has monitored the reservoir, said in an email to the Associated Press, wasn't clear if the damage was deliberate or simple neglect by occupying Russian forces, as you said. He also said, Helms also noted a Russian history of attacking dams. So still hard to know. That's just one scientist weighing into the Associated Press. Go ahead.
The other issue is the timing. The fact that it happened on the exact day where the Ukrainian offensive chainsaw really started to bite into the Russian army is the day they blew it. I can believe a 1% chance, maybe. I can believe it happening in Oklahoma on a random day in the middle of nowhere, maybe. I can't believe it happening precisely when they needed it the most, right, in the middle of the night. This dam didn't break during the day when it was visible, right? It also didn't break. It wasn't a dam that had no explosives that we knew of attached to it. It's a dam we knew that had explosives attached to it, very many of them. It was why the Ukrainians weren't trying to assault the dam. They knew it would be blown up if they tried to. And it happened on exactly the day the Russians needed it. I mean, I'm sorry. I will never say never. But, if it turns out, if someone tries to tell you that, there's some reason that this happened by chance, I think they're just trying to sell you a dam in Brooklyn at that point.
Got it. Okay, so what does this mean for the war and where it's at? I feel like, obviously, I don't pay as close attention to it as you do, but I feel like we've been talking about everybody. It's inevitable that there'll be a counteroffensive by Ukraine because of the time of year and because of the current status of the war. And, yesterday, of course, was D-Day. So thinking about history and thinking about strategy, whatever the counteroffensive is, they're going to try to mislead. They're going to try to keep it as private and quiet as possible to gain leverage, somehow. What are we expecting next? And what does this dam, whether it was done on purpose or not, mean for the strategy of the war?
I think what the dam means is that the war has now shifted into a completely different phase where Russia is, in effect, on defense all the time. They might do another mobilization. They might manage to hold things up for a while. But really, I think we're beginning to get to the end of the middle and starting at the beginning of the end, because Russia hasn't done a mobilization, even though it's lost 100,000+ men in Bakhmut and in other battles this spring and winter. The Russians are not doing the sorts of things you do if you've got some big counterforce. Blowing that dam is such a desperate measure. It's got so many downsides for the Russians, and they did it anyway, which tells you that they probably don't have enough men. In fact, they don't have enough men to cover the front that they have to cover. The Ukrainians have somewhere between 60 and 80,000 men clenched into a fist that's ready to hit the Russians. And what you're seeing in the little that we can glean is the Ukrainians are pushing here, pushing there, pushing everywhere. And when they find a rotten door, they're going to kick it in and pour through 30 or 40,000 men to see if they can really unhinge the Russian front. And what Russia cannot afford here is they cannot afford a mobile battle. They don't have the armored fighting vehicles that they did. Their artillery has a pretty archaic system of moving around. Their air force is okay, but they really have a hard time dealing with Ukrainian air defenses. And if they have to go over Ukrainian lines, they're going to get shot down a ton. And it's the one part of the Russian military that's still sort of intact. So what you're looking at now is this: Russia's on defense, and the Ukrainians are going to try to make them move. And if the Russian army is having to have people rush to defend breakthroughs, a lot of those guys are going to walk home, in my opinion. I think they're going to be getting hit by raiding parties on the way. They're going to get hit by artillery, and the Russian military is already hollowed out. Trying to do a mobile defense is not the kind of thing you do if you're military that can barely supply helmets and guns and boots to the guys in your military. And right. I think you could really see that the Bakhmut will be seen as this era's Brusilov offensive, which is what effectively broke the Russian army right before it completely fell apart in 1917. And I think that there's a historical analogy there that looks pretty good right now. It guaranteed to happen? Not at all. But I think that we are really in a place where some things could become really fluid. And if they become fluid, Ukraine wins. That's it. It's over if it becomes fluid.
Okay, we'll leave it there. That's great analysis. As always, you are simply the best, Bill Boyle. Thank you very much. I look forward to you taking questions from listeners at our Hangouts and any other time on Twitter, of course. And everybody can find out how to contact Bill in the show notes. And if you don't understand how to find the show notes, as one of my friends from high school didn't, I don't know what to tell you. It's just wherever you're listening to the podcast, you'll find them. Thank you, Bill.
Thank you.
All right, that's it. That's all. Zip it up and zip it out. Can you talk real quick? Thank you, Bill Boyle. Really great, as always. Go thank him on Twitter at BillB in DC. Thanks for listening. And if you haven't checked out my conversation with Mick West, the myth debunker, conspiracy theorist debunker, I dropped that at the same time I dropped this one. It's real good. And, of course, I did a quick news update for that. And don't forget to sign up for a paid subscription if you like what you're hearing. And we're done.
When you can't see the forest for the burning trees, you got